This tier list is going to be for anybody that wants to improve at jungle and is within the ranks of Iron to Platinum. And these are the criteria with pros and cons for how I determined where I slotted each champion on the tier list. Starting off the tier list in S with Warwick. He meets all my criteria. He's very easy mechanically, and his game plan is very simple. You hit level 6 as fast as possible, and then you look to preferably dive somebody, but even just a regular gank works as well. You can do lane ganks however you want to do it. His mid game is very strong. Now he is early focused, but that doesn't mean that his mid game is weak by any means. Once he has Ravenous Hydra and Divine Sunderer, he is a nightmare, and that'll continue onward towards third item. After third item, he does start to fall off, but even then, still a very great champion for learning the game. And his build is quite expensive, so he definitely benefits from having high economy. Nocturne, very similar to Warwick in his game plan of he wants to hit level 6 quickly, and then use his ultimate to go onto a target, as well prefers to dive if possible. His mid game is really strong, and just like Warwick, he does fall off in the later stages of the game. However, the reason that I have him to the right of Warwick and not in the number 1 spot is because mechanically he is a little bit harder. And there is the complexity of figuring out how to use his W properly. Amumu. Technically his Q is a skill shot, but realistically he doesn't have to hit it every time because he gets 2 charges, and even if he misses, as long as he hits something nearby, he can still work with it. For example, if he's ganking bot lane and he hits a minion or the support and he's trying to get to the ADC, that's fine. He can still land the Q on one of those targets and land the ult regardless, just because the AoE is so big. Just like with the other 2 champions, his ultimate spike is massive. One issue that I have with it though is the cooldown is very significant, and for improving at jungle, I would prefer that the champion have a relatively low cooldown on their ultimate. That allows you to get more practice with using it, as well as understanding how to play around the cooldown properly. Zac. He is a champion that I recently picked up and hit diamond on. He's not the easiest mechanically of the champions on the list, especially compared to the S tiers. And his ultimate isn't the most obvious lethal in a 1v1. However, the reason that I have him at A tier is because his game plan is very replicable and simple. You just farm. Once you have level 7, then you're good to go. Sometimes you can even work with level 6 as well, just kind of depends on the circumstances of the game. But the main idea is that you have enough points in your E to where you can do significant plays from Fog of War. He has very strong mid-game spike, loves high economy. It is super important to get a lot of XP and gold on Zac. And if you ever decide to pick up Zac, you'll realize that 90% of the champion is, did you farm well? And then did you land your E's and Q's? If you missed your E, then you gotta back out. If you missed your Q, you gotta fix that up. But it's very easy to determine where you messed up on the champion. Vi. He does a similar thing to Warwick and Nocturne. However, the problem that I have with Vi is her execution is a little bit difficult, because if she misses her Q, then she just gains very little value. And her ultimate can be quite complex in how to use it, because you may be thinking, oh, well, it's the same thing as a Warwick ultimate, but you don't have to aim it, which to a degree is true, but it's much slower and it's lower range. Especially if Warwick has his W running, it's a lot easier for him to pull it off. And just in general, his ganks are much easier to execute without ultimate as well. But Vi, if you miss that Q, nothing's going to happen in that game. Volibear. There are a lot of great things about the champion. Overall, he's relatively simple mechanically, but his E does take some practice to get down on where to position it or how to position it. But his level 6 is great for diving, and as I've said many times in this video, I love junglers that are able to dive at level 6. However, his ultimate is on a fairly long cooldown, and it can get kind of confusing on how to use it in a team fight. As well as with his E, sometimes you may want to peel. Sometimes you can use it to slow somebody, but that's not always ideal, or maybe just throw it on yourself as you're queuing. There's many different applications of how to use the E in the ultimate, and that's why I have it in A tier, because even though there are a lot of great things about it, I just think that it's not super simple and replicable on how you're going to play him every game. Shyvana. Love everything about the champion except for her ultimate. Depending on what build variant you're going of Shyvana, she can change drastically on how she plays the game. For example, if you're going AP Shyvana, then you're wanting to get your ultimate, throw an E to burst, and that's pretty much your whole damage. However, if you're going the on-hit variant of Shyvana, or just AD in general, maybe a tankier route, then you're going to be wanting to ult into them for the knockback and damage, and then you start fist fighting. But everything else, besides her ultimate being a little bit unclear on how to use it to turn fights, she's great. Very simple mechanically, her clear's pretty good. She loves to focus Drakes, which is awesome, and she loves to have a lot of gold. She scales really well with her items. Hecarim. Hecarim is not super complex mechanically, but he does take some practice to get down as clear, for example. His level 6 ultimate spike is fantastic though. I love that. However, his complexity comes primarily from how you're going to play him in fights, because there's so many different ways that you could approach it with your E or with your ultimate. Do you want to just go right in? Do you want to use it to peel? As well as you got to set up your Q prior. But he's very mid-game focused, and he does really, really well with high economy. So that's still good enough to get him an A tier. Udyr. If you look through my criteria and you've listened so far through the tier list, you can probably tell why I have him in B tier. He doesn't have a level 6 spike. Sure, technically he can put another point in an ability depending on what he's maxing, but it's not nearly the same as the other champions on the list so far. However, his game plan is fairly simple. If you go the tankier AP type build, then you can just sit in front of your team, use your AoE with your ultimate to slow people down, just be a wall for your team. If you're going a more upfront damage kind of AD build, then it may be a little bit different. But if you're going the tankier route, Udyr's relatively simple. The only thing you got to worry about is managing his passive, but after a few games, you should be able to get the hang of it. Wukong. I have him in B tier because he does have some good aspects, like his level 6 spike, but the problem I have with him is he can be quite complex in how you want to approach fights with Wukong, or skirmishes in general. Do you want to start with E ultimate? Do you want to wait for your team to go in, kind of hide in invis? If you're chasing somebody, do you start with E? Do you start with W? Do you use your W before using your Q so that it applies the extra Q? Same thing with your ultimate. There's so many different ways to play a team fight with Wukong, which is why I think while there are many good aspects that I do like about Wukong, he does have the invis and complexity of how he approaches fight, so that's why I have him in B tier. Pain. The parts that I like about him is he benefits very well from high economy, and his level 6 spike is great for diving. He has really good scaling. However, he does have the complexity of being able to go either blue or red Kayn. Now you could decide to just go one form of Kayn. Some Kayn mains do that. That's okay if you want to go that route, at least initially. But even then, if you're going blue Kayn, then there's the complexity of being very squishy, and you have to execute everything perfectly because you don't have CC to work with. With red Kayn, it's not as big of a deal if you miss an ability, but even then, it's a little bit more complex on how you play a fight because you're not just every time going in to one-shot somebody. You have to think a little bit more about how you're going to peel or who you're going to target in a fight. That's why I have him in the middle of B tier. Sejuani. Main problem that I have with her is that she's not going to benefit from high economy nearly as well as the other champions on the list, but her ultimate is very good for getting a pick, and so her execution in fights is fairly straightforward. Master Yi. At the high levels, he is mechanically quite difficult, but the skill floor isn't too bad for me to not recommend him at all. His level 6 lethal isn't the clearest. A lot of Master Yi players will use it too early or not at all, and the ways to execute fights can be very difficult for a lot of E players because they'll just outright ignore CC and then get locked down. But he does spike very hard mid to late game, and he absolutely loves high economy as very expensive items. But he is definitely feast or famine. If you are behind on Yi, good luck. Lilia. Not the easiest mechanically. Now there are some things that are relatively manageable about her. Like her Q isn't the worst thing ever, but it does still take a lot of practice spacing, especially when you're at such a high movement speed. You gotta really get your clicks down. And her ultimate spike isn't always clear on how to turn it into a kill, especially when lower elo teammates will just hit them for no reason. However, her game plan is very simple. You just farm like crazy, get super strong in the mid to late game, and you just run over team fights. Evelynn. There are a lot of things I don't like about her. Invis, permanent invis, and feast or famine. But there are a lot of things that I do like about her as I thought about it more. Her level 6 spike is very good, and her game plan is very simple, just one shot of squishy. That's all you gotta do, just consistently every game, just making sure you're getting those one shots. As long as you have a lead, that should not be difficult, relative to trying to do it on other champions. For those same reasons, she benefits very well from high economy, because if she has the gold to one shot, then she's going to love it. She has the Magi Soul Stealer, and she's going to pop off. Nunu. The only remotely mechanical thing on him is his snowball, but his ultimate isn't always the easiest to set up properly, which makes his game plan kind of difficult of, do you set up a one shot in the brush? Do you use it more to peel your teammates? Do you start with snowball into ults? Do you use the ult just for the shield? He also doesn't benefit as well from high economy because he's going to do a fairly similar job regardless. But his objective control is fantastic with his Q. Kha'Zix. He has a lot of similarities to Evelynn, but some things I didn't like that made me move him down a tier. Mechanically, I am of the belief that he's a little bit harder than Evelyn. His ultimate is not super clear on when to use it for a kill. Some people will use it in the middle of the fight, some will do it when coming out of a brush after they've already been seen. And it can be much harder to get out of a fight compared to with Evelyn, because with Kha'Zix you get the kill, and typically you're not going to have your E evolved, so you have to use your ultimate to try to sneak your way back out. With Evelyn, when you're R'ing, it's pretty easy to just get out of there. He is also Feast or Famine like Evelyn, but he doesn't have the benefit of being able to buy Mejai's Soul Stealer. But if he gets his gold income that he needs, he will absolutely run over people, just jumping all over the place, one-shotting everyone. Maokai. He has a lot of similarities to Nunu, in the sense that when he's going in for a gank, he's just going in, locking down the target, and for the most part letting his teammates do the damage. However, his ultimate is even more complicated because you have to use it way in advance. The main issue that I have with Maokai is his ultimate is used for disengage typically instead of engaging a fight yourself, which I would much rather a champion be engaging like Warwick, Nocturne, Zac, etc. than having to play back when it comes to improving at the game in lower elos. Similar to Nunu, he does not benefit very well from high economy. His items are very cheap, so yes, he can get strong early on, but even if he gets a lot of gold, it's not going to do nearly as much for him as it would on other champions. That's one of many reasons why I would rather people pick Zac if they want to go tanky champion. Olaf, not the easiest mechanically. A lot of players, they will default to throwing the Q max range when many times it is better to throw it at the minimum range so you can pick it up faster. His ultimate can be very confusing on how to use because it's not going to turn into a one-shot in the same way that it would for the S tier champions. It's more of something where you're having to predict what the opponents are going to do and then respond with your ultimate. As well as he's very squishy in fights, so you have to be very careful at how you approach them, especially since you're a melee champion without a dash. But if you have some enchanters on your team, then he can be very, very strong in the mid game. Even without enchanters, he's still pretty strong mid game, and he loves if he has a lot of gold. The final champion that I have on the list is Jarvan. Mechanically, he's not too bad, but there are some issues with him. For one, his teamfight execution can be very confusing. His ultimate doesn't do a whole lot of direct damage, and he doesn't benefit as well as some of the other champions on high economy fight by just dashing in and ulting on somebody to try to have the team one-shot them, which sometimes that is good, don't get me wrong, but a lot of times they'll do that even when their allies don't have ways to get over the wall or they don't have range, and so they can't actually help the Jarvan kill the target.